I'm Ryan Howe, creator of Daisy Blackwood, Pilot for Hire, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Ryan Howe about creating Daisy Blackwood, Pilot for Hire. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Ryan is a cartoonist based in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. With a diploma in visual communications from Medicine Hat College, he puts his education to use in the field of graphic and web design. Ryan's previous comics include Gun Street Girl, written and created by Barb Lee and Cooper, distributed through the Graphic Smash Comics portal in 2003, Henchman, Robot Paper, Jurassic Strike Force 5, from Zenescope, Wyvia Starling, Troubleshooter, R-Squared Studios, and Captain Flint and the Corsairs of the Seven Systems, Robot Paper. His ongoing series is Daisy Blackwood, Pilot for Hire. Daisy Blackwood, Pilot for Hire is a series that often deals with bank robbers, air pirates, and the police. As pilot, Daisy Blackwood has to solve mysteries and fend off bad guys. The ongoing series is a loving tribute to the original pulp serials, full of high adventure, exotic locales, and daring deeds. Unlike the old serials, however, each Daisy Blackwood book contains a complete adventure, allowing it to stand on its own apart from other volumes in the series. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Ryan Howe about creating Daisy Blackwood, Pilot for Hire. Ryan Howe, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Of course, thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time. What you should do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
It's a little hazy, but I know there was a couple main stages. My mom had a giant box of Archies and old Disney Digest full of like Uncle Scrooges and stuff. So I know it was definitely one of those. So I kind of had that Carl Barks kind of influence right off the hop. And then there was a few asterisks in there. But I remember my first mainstream Marvel comic was an Eric Larson issue of Amazing Spider-Man it's the Vulture and Nathan. It's the one where Nathan, Aunt May's boyfriend, dies. And I remember I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like there, it's wild, and it was kind of at that height at the end of McFarlane and Larson era before Image founding and stuff. That was the big ones.
Good stuff. Very good inspirations. But I'm wondering, who or what inspires you to create today?
Oh, there's so much. Like when I first started reading comics, like I said, Larson was in there. So you kind of got that early Marvel push and you get the general superhero artists and stuff. But I branched out fairly quickly to like European comics and stuff. And I was lucky that my library had a lot of like Asterix and Tintin. So I look at a lot of European artists even now, kind of seeing like the different atmospheric styles and things like that. Off the top of my head, I'm terrible with pronunciation of names. Jordi Burnett? I think that's it.
Sure. Okay.
Sorry, but there's kind of a Alfonso Font. Like there's a huge amount of artists, and I'm terrible with bringing them up. But I really like looking at a lot of like older artists, newer artists, and just kind of seeing everything. There's no specific one artist. Like I still go back to like Alex Toth and look at a lot of his stuff, or like Jack Davis. I got back into a little while ago. Modern guys. There's so many fantastic artists coming out all the time. The artist on Once in Future, I think, is Dan Mora. His art's absolutely amazing on that. And it's really kind of got my excitement up for the kind of stuff he's doing there. It's both simple and complex all at the same time with kind of that cartoony look.
No, that's good. So here's another question. Then how did you get your start in making comic books? How did you get started?
Oh, I just always have drawn. I've been told this story many times as like 3 or 4. So like earlier than I can remember, where my grandmother drew a picture of a rabbit and I took it away from her. That's no rabbit. So I've been drawing for forever. And when I realized that you could just string images together to create a story with it, then I was kind of hooked and away I went. I know a lot of people like the more pinup or kind of cover style illustration where it's single spot illustrations, but I've always really liked the storytelling aspect of it. I feel, for me at least, it comes through a little more naturally, and I like being able to tell that story over multiple pages kind of thing. So yeah, just always drawn.
Sure. You always had a pencil or some drawing implement in your hand, I guess, growing up?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, let's talk about one of your current projects you have in the go, Daisy Blackwood, Pilot for Hire. I wonder if you could talk a wee bit about that for people who are not familiar with that story.
For sure. Daisy Blackwood is kind of a paranormal science fiction throwback adventure series. It takes place in the past. There's no specific date, but it's kind of like that late 30s to mid 1940s kind of aesthetic to it. So a lot of engines, a lot of airplanes. There's not really a lot of like modern technology. She's a pilot for hire that kind of gets dragged into different adventures with like mad scientists or monsters or things like that. And it's really my excuse to do kind of a ramshackle series of adventures of whatever I kind of want to do. So there's no real set villains or anything like that. I just kind of bumble from story to story, just kind of having fun with whatever I want to draw.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot of fun. Did you get inspired by anything specific? Like it seems kind of pulpy, or maybe some female version of Indiana Jones. Were those sort of inspirations?
It's funny. Indy's a little bit of an influence, but it's really my excuse to do like DuckTales by way of Tailspin, just throwing in other stuff in there. I remember when I was really little, like Nickelodeon used to air those old Fleischer Superman cartoons all the time.
Right, yeah.
So kind of that aesthetic and that kind of world, and like Batman the Animated Series, kind of playing in that more, like you said, pulpy world is a lot of fun. So it's really just my excuse to get in there with a lot of the influences that I grew up loving, that I just kind of want to play in that sandbox.
Yeah, it sort of also has the Rocketeer sort of feel to it.
Yeah.
Cool. One of the other projects I remember that you worked on was The Burning Black with Mark Allard Will, which is definitely a different sort of turn of events from Daisy Blackwood. So I'm wondering, how was that working on that particular project with Mark?
Well, before I did Daisy, I did a lot of horror books and horror kind of one-shots for different people. So when Mark suggested Burning Black, I'm like, oh, this would be fun. I haven't done one of these in a while. And it was really interesting because with, like, say, Daisy, it's in the past, but it's not that distant a past. So you can still find a lot of reference material for it. With Burning Black, the reference material is a little more sparse. So when it opens up with a big battle between a couple armies. So even finding like references, so it'd be semi-authentic gear for both sides, was trickier. So there was a lot of kind of filling in the blank sort of things with that. The settings, the villages, that kind of stuff was a little trickier to kind of source. So it ended up being pretty stylized. It was a lot of fun in that way. Like I said, it opened up with a giant battle scene. And Mark's like, 2 armies, huge battle scene. They kind of crash into each other. I'm like, oh God, this is 3 pages. I'm going to be 10 years doing this. And so I remember kind of developing a little visual shorthand where the heroes were a little more ramshackle in their attires. It was kind of more cobbled together. So because they were the guys we sympathized with, they were more individual armor schemes. So I kind of set up a grid of different tops, bottoms, helmets, that kind of stuff. So I could quickly mash up different character combinations. Whereas with the army that was opposing in the more empire of an army, they were a lot more uniform in look. So while they probably would have been more cobbled together uniforms as well, it just kind of visually set the tone between whose side you're kind of on. So in that way, I kind of cheated the historical aspect, because again, it was a horror story. So it's not wildly historically accurate, but it was a really neat process, because Mark would send me reference photos of like the different models of like the town where it takes place, as well as the castle, that kind of stuff. It was a really fascinating project.
Now, it sounds like Mark had a certain idea for something, and you came back saying artistically no. It was a collaborative process. Well, no, I wouldn't say no outright, but
no, you'll kill me.
But you were giving constructive criticism, saying, okay, well, how about this? So was that the way it sort of worked? Like he would come up with the script, and you'd say, okay, here's how I envision it. What do you think of this? Was it a back and forth type of thing, or did he have the script all laid out and said, just go for it?
Mark had the script fully. When I came on the project, he's like, here's what I've written. Have a go, see if you're interested. So it was great. So I had the entire thing right in front of me. So usually I like to be as collaborative as they'll allow, because especially in this case, because he'd already written the script, he kind of knew what he wanted for it. So I developed character sketches. Like I said, I worked out that grid of armors and things like that, and ran them by him to see if that was what he had in mind. So what I generally do is I don't send them like layouts or anything, but I'll do a set of rough pencils and be like, are we good here? Do we need to change anything? We go back and forth on adapting things. Mark's a fantastic collaborator. He's always up for input and suggestions and things like that. And I never really ever desire to like change a script or anything he's written. I try to work within it. The only time I might be like, hey, can we kind of look at this, as if maybe like a camera angle might work a little bit better with the way the story flow goes, or just kind of flopping the flow of it a bit. Mostly just the visual aspect of things, because I trust the written flow to things, and I'm just interested in making sure that their story's coming through as the best possible way I can do it.
Right. No, it makes sense. Yeah. Now, certainly, working on a book like this, like The Burning Black, differs from Daisy Blackwood as a webcomic. Mm-hmm. And certainly, as a webcomic creator, you're your own boss and your own person. How did it differ when you were actually working with Mark on this project? Was there a lot of give and take, or did you just go with the flow? How did that work out?
Like I said, Mark's really open to collaboration. So it was, for the most part, incredibly easy. The hardest part, like I said, was really just getting the reference. Mm-hmm. And he was a wonderful resource for that. So it's just kind of making sure. I might do a few extra sketches because I was way off base with something. I just didn't understand what it was supposed to be. But the biggest difference really from a webcomic is when I do the webcomic, I'm writing it. So I'm kind of writing to all the strengths and the fun stuff I want to do, even though sometimes I'll do something stupid like, why do I want to draw a crowd? Why'd that seem like a good idea at the time? But So I really can kind of both play to my strengths, but if I'm being kind of lazy about something, I can just be kind of lazy about something because who's going to tell me no? Right. Whereas if I'm collaborating with somebody, then I'm always kind of making that extra effort because I want to make sure they're going to be happy. I want to make sure I'm happy bringing their vision to life. So, and I'm also kind of, there's words here. I'm also kind of trying to get a feel for what their intention is. Oh, okay. So I'm probably feeling around a little bit more than I would for my own stuff because in my head I know what I'm going for, and theirs I'm interpreting. So there's a little bit more work there as well.
Sure. Yeah. Now talk about collaborating. You also have another project on the go called Bad Karma, and maybe you could talk a bit about that book and who you're working with on that.
Bad Karma is a collaboration between myself, Alex DeCampi, who wrote it, and Dee Cunniffe, who is doing the coloring on it. And Alex had done a little web comic that was 1 or 2 pages called Hell's Kitchen Movie Club. That was like a Punisher Bucky riff where they'd just be watching movies and little mini adventures would kind of take place around. It was really fun. And I'd been a reader and she'd been looking for an artist and sent in a sample. It's like, hey, I'd love to draw one of these. And she's like, great. And so we did one. And then a little time went by. She's like, hey, I've got this idea for like this, kind of throwback to the 80s, kind of 2 ex-military buddies road trip kind of adventure, right? It's kind of in that Shane Black territory. I'm like, oh, that sounds amazing. Yep. I'm all over that, right? Like, I'm a kid of the 80s, like Shane Black, that kind of stuff. I'm like, I'm down with that. So she sent me this script, and it's about 2 military veterans that are just kind of bumbling through life at that point, and they've kind of grown weary with where everything's at. They're kind of burnt out with everything, and they all kind of come back together over this mistake they've made in their past and kind of their course correction, trying to get their lives back on track through this correcting of a past mistake. And it's really interesting. It's got action elements, but it's got a really strong heart to it. And you really care about these characters right from the jump and kind of want to see where they go with it. And it's big and it's sprawling and it's at the same time very personal. It's so much fun to do.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's for sure. Do you have a preference? Like it sounds like there, you've still got Daisy Blackwood on the go as a webcomic, but you've got these other projects. Do you find that you're leaning more towards one versus the other, like a collaborative, big, sprawling epic, or would you prefer the webcomic that you can hone in on and you know exactly where things are going?
It's, it's day to day, right? Like you do want to like, oh, I wish it was the other, and do the other, like, oh, I wish it was that one. So it's nice to have both. For a long time, I was actually doing both, where I do a page of Daisy a week and I do 2 or 3 pages of Bad Karma. And it was a great kind of release valve for each other where, you kind of get burned out on one. You could switch back to the other, just let everything kind of relax and then go right back into it fresh. So I don't really have a preference. The one downside to kind of like the bigger, more sprawling books is that they do take a long time. Like Daisy generally takes about 10 to 12 months by the time I'm done updating each book. So it's not so bad, but like Bad Karma, we're coming up on about 3 years. It's a little more detailed for reference. It's also gigantic. I think it's be close to 300 pages by the time it's done. Wow. So there's only so much time in the day, so I can only do so much. I'd love to just be banging out pages all day, but especially with Bad Karma, I want to make sure that, because it's from a military story, I want to make sure that a lot of the gear is as accurate as I can make it within my own style and within time frames and things like that. So they're both wonderful and they both have drawbacks, and it's all good. Yeah. It's like any project.
I presume you're a stickler for accuracy. You don't want to let things slide.
Kind of. So I remember way back in the day, I saw an Alex Toth criticism of, I want to say Steve Rude, that did a Johnny Quest story. Oh. And it was super enlightening and super terrifying. Just like, why didn't you look up what this gun looks like? That's what a helicopter is. I'm like, I need to pay attention to things like this. So I draw in a weird, it's not quite real. It's not quite cartoony. It's kind of a hybrid of the two. It's just the way it comes out of my brain. So drawing a lot of detail looks really weird. Drawing too little detail looks really weird. So I try to get accurate within that, but it's not ever really drawing like every screw in a rifle or anything like that, right? So I'm always trying to make sure there's enough detail to get across what it is and not look odd, but at the same time, not trying to, beat my head in drawing every rivet. Kind of thing.
That's fair. I want to talk about another book that still to this day astounds me because it's relevant to this day. It's called This Place 150 Years Retold. I keep bumping into all these creators who, either got their start or had some significant, story in there and are still relevant today. The stories that carry on and definitely still need to be retold. So I wanted to just chat a wee bit about the story you did there called Nimki and just to ask you a bit about how that came about and what do you think about the project overall?
For sure. Oh, that was, that was a little while ago. It came about, they'd reached out to me, and I can't really remember at this moment who recommended it. I believe it was a collaborator I had on a different project that just happened to be talking to them. And they're like, hey, would you be interested in doing this story? And I read it and I'm like, this is super relevant. I would love to help in any way I could, making sure these stories get out there. And if that's drawing it, that's wonderful. But I was very much non-First Nations. So I wanted to make sure that, I'd be provided a ton of reference so I could be as accurate as possible, that kind of stuff. And they were absolutely wonderful. Between the author and our editors, they had tons of reference. They're always checking stuff. Before the story ever started, we went through a huge sketch phase where I was sending sketches of pretty much the entire book in like characters and settings and stuff back and forth with them, ironing everything out to make sure we were 100% where we needed to be with things. One thing with Dimki that did kind of resonate with my own background, at least visually, was a lot of it takes place on kind of a farm. And I grew up in a rural setting. So I'm like, I can hopefully lend a little bit of authenticity, just kind of the setting of it and how this would look kind of a deal.
You're able to provide your own sort of personal take on it, I guess, basically.
But yeah, it's a wonderful story.
But speaking about tools and stuff, I wonder if you could walk me through some of the tools you use to create your art, whether it be web comics or collaborating with others in projects. What tools do you use?
I fully digital, actually. I had been using a Wacom Cintiq for the longest time, and I finally transitioned to a Huion Canvas. Yeah, I've been digital for quite a while. 10 years ago, when my wife and I had our first son, I was pen and ink. That was all I was. And I realized very quickly that little fingers make little ink stains all over the place. So I started looking towards a little easier setup. So I also was able to kind of downscale my office. So yeah, I've been digital for about 10 years, and it's been absolutely wonderful, just from a speed perspective and kind of being able to work a little more efficiently. I'm a very sloppy penciler. I put down every line possible, and then I kind of refine it in the inking stage. So to be able to like drop opacity, erase, bring it back, copy, move around, resize has been an absolute blessing. It was so much work with light boxing and stuff that as much as I miss it from a nostalgia perspective, I really don't miss it from a work perspective.
Right. Yeah, I hear speed is one of the major factors that you gain when working digital with those types of devices.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a trade-off in that, like with pen and ink, you can like, I just want to smudge this or make a texture. You grab a toothbrush, grab your finger, you just kind of grind some ink in there, right? With a computer, anything like that, you're either looking for brushes or you're having to make your own. So you kind of end up hoarding a lot of toolkits and stuff just in case. But the speed overall is so much faster. Yeah.
Are you tied down? I'm not sure how mobile this is, but I know that sometimes people have sketchbooks that they take with them if something inspires them. They're out about. With digital, that's not the case, right? You have to go back to your studio, and everything is just right there, locked down.
Yeah, so that was something I kind of struggled with for a while. I've never been a huge sketchbook person. I love the idea of them, but carrying them around is always kind of cumbersome to me, and I never have it when I want it. So that wasn't a huge loss, but I still liked being able to take work with me or do like some sketching. Kind of from the hop, I've been using a laptop originally, and so I had the Wacom side pen instead of like the screen. So I was just using Intuos for that. So it was all right, but it wasn't great for drawing. But I was really lucky in that iPad didn't have pencils yet at that time. So
Right.
I was using like a Lenovo with a stylus. I used like the Samsung devices. Right now I'm using an iPad with Clip Studio. So everything just kind of syncs back and forth. So there's no real barrier anymore. I basically just, like when I go to my day job, I just sync my previous day's pages, and then on my breaks and stuff, I just doodle away on those and then sync it back up when I get home, which is wonderful.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we've talked about a lot of different projects, and I'm wondering, are there any other projects coming up that you can talk about? Anything on the go?
Oh, it's going to be bad karma for a while yet.
Okay, that's cool.
At the moment, the biggest project on the horizon is going to be another volume of Daisy. I've got a story planned for when I'm done Bad Karma to kind of get back into the Daisy universe and do some stuff there that'll tie up a few things from the previous books. Like each one is essentially a standalone. You could read it by yourself, but I do have some continuing threads I'd kind of like to put to bed to move on to some other stuff. So Daisy's the big one. There are some other projects right now, but it's still early days, and I'm not sure kind of when the timelines will line up. So
Sure. Now, you mentioned how you're from Western Canada. Any interest in going back to trade shows, conventions, that sort of thing?
yeah, so I'm in Saskatoon, and the local show, the Sask Expo, just released their registration dates. So it's kind of like, well, it's going to be in the spring. So it's like, well, who knows what the numbers will be like, but we'll wear masks, we'll put up barriers and stuff. Con is always a thing of like, there's many possible ways of not getting sick. So you've got the hand sanitizer and stuff already. So it's just a few extra steps from normal. But yeah, there's a hesitation there definitely, but there's also that kind of desire to get out and see friends that you haven't seen in a while and just interact with people.
Thanks to Ryan for the chat. You can discover more about Ryan on Twitter at Ryan_Howe. That's HOWE. And you can discover more about Daisy Blackwood Pilot for Hire at daisyblackwood.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also, check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.